All right, Shabbosai, good morning, a good tevach. Hoping that everyone as well had a beautiful, restorative, and restful Shabbos. Such a schus, Baruch Hashem, to begin another week of Maseches Gittin. We begin by thanking our sponsors, thanking our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Sherman Joshua's this month as a zechus for a refuah shalema of Kathy's sister, Dana Baker Matson. We hope that she has a refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So with that, let us begin. We also, of course, take the opportunity. We heard the tragic news that came out of Eretz Yisrael just over Shabbos with the 3 soldiers who were killed and the Egyptian border. So we dedicate our learning Le'ilei Nishmas Ohad Dahan, Leah Ben Nun, and Ori Yitzchak Iluz, who were the 3 precious soldiers who were killed. It's important for us to be Makir Tov and to recognize that every single day, precious, beautiful young men and women put their lives on the line for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and we should just hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to give them incredible siyata d'shmaya to be successful in all of their missions. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give an aliyah to these 3 precious neshamas, and Amir Hashem allow their families to find nechama in the years ahead. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Yotes 19. Yud 19. We are starting at the Mishnah, brand new Mishnah today, Meretz Hashem. Mishnah, B'chol Kosin. So we'll say, what's interesting really now is the coming sugyas ahead is in Meretz Hashem, we're going to really be focusing on some of the halachos concerning Gittin. In other words, we've already began this in the last Mishnah when we started speaking about Zman, the concept of the need for a date. Now the truth is, the primary sugya of Zman Begin, of dating a get, ultimately is going to come a little bit later in our Masechta, but at least we got a little bit of a taste of it. So suppose I say now into some of the technical details, ultimately concerning it. So Mishnah, you test me off 19a, 6 lines down from the top. Bakol Kosovim. You could write a get with anything, specifically B'dio. We'll translate these words to the best of our abilities. Dio means ink, Sam means paint, Sikra means red dye or red paint. Bekumus, kumus is like gum, and bekan consum. We'll define kan consum in the Gemara. Ubechol davar shushal kayama. Both say, bottom line is, these are just examples. The Mishnah now gives us a definition. With what can you write the get? Anything which will endure. Remember, we're going to discuss that when a woman gets her get, it's incredibly important, it's imperative that she holds on to it. Now, the truth is today, interestingly enough, practice is we actually do not give either of the parties the get. Rather, we give them a document from Beis Din, ultimately indicating that a get has been given. But the idea is, in the original form, a woman got her get, right? She received her get, and she had to keep it. That was incredibly important. That would allow her to go ahead and remarry. That would go ahead and ensure that if any questions came up about future children, future relationships, she could produce proper documentation. Therefore, it is of utmost importance that the get be written in some type of material that could endure. So you could use any type of ink as long as it is shel kayama. Ein kosin lo b'mashkin, v'lo b'mei peros, v'lo b'chol davar she'eino miskayim. So conversely, you can't write with mashkin are literally liquids, right? Mei peros, fruit juice, or b'chol davar she'eino miskayim. Again, here's the klal. Anything that is not going to endure, you cannot use to write a get. Fine. So we'll say that's part 1 of the Mishnah. What type of ink you could use. Part 2, on what can you write the get itself. Ala kol kosvin. We'll say you could write a get. You could write a get on anything. What can you write the get on? Ala olah shel zayis, on the leaf of an olive tree. Vala keren shel para. This is interesting. You could write a get on the horn of a cow. But, all right, similarly again, but with the caveat, what's the caveat? The no sin la safara. You got to give her the cow. In other words, again, which makes sense, because remember, again, we're going to discuss these details as well, but one of the major aspects of Gittin is v'nasan biyada. The get has to be given over to the woman. So you could write the get on the horn of the cow, but the cow itself must be handed over to the woman. Al yad shel eved, similarly, again, you can write a get on the hand of an Eved Kanani, because also remember again, an Eved Kanani is property. So you can write the get on the hand of the Eved Kanani, v'nosin lasa Eved. But once again, you have to give her the Eved. Rabbi Yosef Lili says, no, Ein kosvin lo adavar sheish bo ruach chayim v'lo al ochen. So also Rabbi Yossi argues on this last point. He says you cannot write a get on any living thing. Can't write a get on anything that is alive. So therefore, what he's really arguing on is the case of writing the get on the horn of the cow, or ultimately, again, on the hand of the eved. Furthermore, he holds you cannot write a get on foodstuffs, on anything that is considered to be a ma'achal of food. Again, we'll discuss what the nature of his particular position is in Meretz Hashem in the Gemara. Incredible, we'll say, so that's our Mishnah. So we'll say 3 major points. Number 1, you can use any kind of ink as long as it endures. Number 2, you could use any type of material as long as it endures. Number 3, Machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, can you write a get on a living thing? Tanakama says yes, but, what's the but? The but is, you have to convey ownership of that living thing to the Isha. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says no, cannot use anything that is alive, also can't use any food items. Beautiful. So we'll say, now let's get into our definitions. Gemara, great Mishnah. Good. Let's do. Says the Gemara, dio diusa. So we'll say here the Gemara is taking the items in the Mishnah and just translating them into Aramaic, which is not very helpful for us, but it's helpful for the Gemara. Okay. So what's dio diusa? Okay, great. What's sama? What's sikra? Amarabba barbachana sakarta shma. Ultimately, again, sakarta is its name, right? Kumus is kuma. So remember, we actually define all of these items we defined in the Mishnah. The one thing we didn't define was kan consum. What's kan consum? Amar Rabba Barbachana. So Amar Shmuel charta de ushbachi. It's the blackening material, ultimately again of a shoemaker. There was when a shoemaker would go out and make a shoe. So remember again, if you want a pair of black shoes, he would have to take the hide and blacken it. How do you blacken the hide? Apparently, that's with kan consum. It can't consume some type of dye. So ultimately, again, these are all materials which could be used to write a get, because when you write with these materials, ultimately they endure. Next, and you can ultimately go ahead and use any type of dye or any type of ink that endures. So we'll say here, just to point out stylistically about the Mishnah, here's what's fascinating, right? What was the structure of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, Bakol kosvim, right? You can go ahead and write with anything, right? And then it goes in and gives a whole bunch of examples. And then it says, with any type of ink that is going to endure. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. The fact that the Mishnah stylistically said, B'chol davar shemiskayim, indicates that what? The items listed in the Mishnah are not meant to be an all-inclusive list. Rather, what are they meant to be? Examples. Vaharaya, the Mishnah says, and you can write with anything else that endures, which indicates to us that the list is actually much more exhaustive. So says the Gemara, what does it come to include? So this is actually very interesting. So what else is included in this list of items which can be used for the writing of a get? So we'll say it comes to include the following case. What did Rabbi Chanina say? Kasvu b'meitaria va'afza kasher. So we'll say if you write a get, b'meitaria. Now Rashi says over meitaria, we'll say it's in the where the lines of Rashi get short. It's 2, 4, about 6 lines in there. B'meitaria megishamim. So we'll say Rashi gives 2 girsos. His first explanation is meitaria is rainwater. Lashomori meitaria ma'im sheshorim bo pri shukein afatzim. Others say it's water in which fruit has been steeped. Now, obviously, when he speaks about rainwater, he must be talking about what? Dirty rainwater, right? In other words, because clear rainwater, right? Dirty rainwater, which actually is an interesting intersection of our Torah lives, because we're going to be talking about this in Smichas Chaver, right? About the use. Oh, actually, we already spoke about it partially in Smichas Chaver. The ability, if you see a puddle of rain, technically speaking, you could go ahead and use that as Efer Netilas Yadayim. Now, we were speaking about a clean puddle of rain. What happens with a dirty puddle of Meretz Hashem? Coming attractions for tomorrow night. In any event, so what Rabbi Chanina says, you can go. I'm sorry. Oh, so you can go. So meitaria ultimately again is rainwater or water in which fruit was steeped. So the Gemara says meitaria vafatza. So we'll say afatza, we are going to become great friends with Afatza. Afatza is golnut juice, right? The number of, right, so we're going to see golnut juice is big stuff. Why is golnut juice? First of all, it's excellent. It's excellent iron supplement. I don't know if that's true or not, but again, so nice again. Golnut juice, we're going to see documents were treated with me'afatzim, golnut juice. Why? Because apparently what it did was it made the shtar tamper-proof. In other words, that if you wrote a shtar and then you went ahead and you treated it, or you treated it and then wrote on it, probably wrote it and then treated it. So lemaisa, again, any type of changes would be easily discernible. So it was a way to ensure that a document has not been tampered with. Again, we'll get into that. So the point over here, the Gemara is saying, remember, let's go back. The Mishnah said you could write a get with anything that endures. So now the Gemara says, what does that come to include? So the Gemara says, it comes to include meitaria, either water, right, rainwater, dirty rainwater, or water in which fruit was steeped, or golnut juice, kasher. Tana Bechir says, kasu be'ever. B'shachar u'b'shichor. So I'll say ultimately again, if you go ahead and you write a get, Aver will say is lead, shichor is charcoal, and shachar is charcoal, and shichor, I will say, is that same shoemaker material, that shoemaker dye. Kosher, ultimately again, the get is kosher. Itmar. So I will say, so bottom line is, if someone asks you, what can I write a get with? The simple answer is, whatever endures. Whatever endures. In other words, that's the thread. That's the criteria. It has to endure. All of these are examples of things that endure, but the lists are not at all meant to be limiting, right? But the lists are just meant to be illustrative. Good. Now we come to a fascinating case. Watch this. Itmar. So we're switching gears here for a moment from Hilchos Gittin to Hilchos Shabbos. So here we go. Itmar. So the Gemara says as follows. So listen to this. A person goes ahead. Here's the case. A person writes with dio. Now remember again, classic dio is black ink. Sikra is red ink. See, here's the case, Rabbi say. I have red letters. On Shabbos, I come along and I write in black ink over red letters. So what's the halacha? Listen to this, Rabbi say. Wow. I just want to point out, some averos are just not worth it, right? Some averos may be worth it, right? This is not worth it, right? So I go ahead and I write black letters, right, using black ink over red ink. I'm chayiv twice on Shabbos. For what? Achos mishum kosev. One because of writing, v'achas mishum mochek, and ultimately one because of erasing. Now, I will say, let's talk about this just a moment. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, agabe sikra, shtei osios shel sikra. So we'll say, remember again, let's talk about for a moment, we have a malacha on Shabbos called kosev, called writing. What is that malacha? That malacha says you're not allowed to write two letters. It's not just limited to letters, it could also be meaningful symbols, but we'll just go with letters right now. You're not allowed to write 2 letters on Shabbos. I will say the sister malacha to kosev is moche. But I will say, where does ksiva come from in the Mishnah? Because all of the malachos come from the Mishkan. So where was writing done in the Mishkan? Where was writing done in the Mishkan? The boards of the Mishkan, the crushing. Remember, when they disassembled the Mishkan, the halacha was you had to assemble it using the boards in the same place. So how would you go ahead and ensure you put up the boards in the same place? They would label the boards, like aleph, bays, whatever. This way you would know where each board, or however they would know, each board where they would go. So we'll say the same way writing was done in the Mishkan, so writing is malacha. But I just tell you, by the way, just as an aside, there's a very interesting minhag that some have, that when putting up their sukkah, to always use the same boards in the same formation. Same boards in the same formation, reminiscent of the Mishkan. It's not a halacha, but an interesting minhag. In any event, so we'll say, so that's we have ksiv in the Mishkan, therefore there's a malacha, midarais on Shabbos of kosev. So now what do I have? I have 2 red letters, and essentially what I do on Shabbos is I write over those red letters in black ink. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, so I'm chayiv twice. Number 1, I'm chayiv for writing, ksiva, and I'm chayiv for mechika. Now we'll say, let's talk about this. Why am I chayiv for writing? So we'll say, this goes with the idea that black ink is considered to be a superior form of writing than red ink. As such, I am doing something that is a demonstrative improvement. So I'm now creating, even though again, I'm writing over the same letters, but Lamaisa, I'm doing something that is demonstratively superior, and therefore, halacha lamaisa, I'm going to be chayiv for kosev. Why am I chayiv for mochik? Why am I chayiv for erasing? I'm chayiv for erasing because I've obliterated, or I've erased, so to speak, the red letters. Look at Rashi. Mochik. Rashi says, Amanas lichtov shtei osios b'shabes chayiv, v'zeh mochik hatachtono sikra v'kasav halyonos. So it's actually very interesting. So remember again, mechika, which is the malach of erasing, you're only chayiv for mechika da'oraisa, for erasing da'oraisa when it's erasing on the condition to write. In other words, we'll say, if a person just stam erases and they don't have in mind to write, that's not the Isser D'Oraisa. The Isser D'Oraisa is erasure in order to write something else. So therefore, we'll say, you've created over here the perfect halachic storm. If I have two red letters and I write over them, so I'm doing two things. I'm really number one erasing, right? I'm taking away the red letters with the condition to, with the intention to write, and I'm writing two black letters, which is a superior writing, so it's mechika. I'm chayiv twice. Incredible. Good. However, dio agabe dio, but I will say if you write, if you write, let's say, you have black letters and you just trace over them another set of black letters, or sikra agabe sikra, or red writing on top of red writing, pater. Ultimately, I'm going to be pater. Now, I will say, why am I pater? Haven't done anything. Now, I will say, generally, you know, what does pater mean? Right? The Rambam always understands it this way. It means usually pater avalasar. In other words, you're not allowed to do it, but if you did it, technically speaking, there's no liability. So we'll say, so case one, black letters over red letters, I'm going to be chayiv twice. Once for mochek and once for kosev. Right? Black letters on top of black letters, red letters on top of red letters, nothing. Now we'll say third case, sikra gabedio. Oh, watch this. What happens if I write red letters on top of black letters? So we'll say, what's the halacha? Amri lechayiv, amri pater. Some say ultimately again that I am chayiv, and some say that I am pater. Let's analyze. Amri lechayiv, those who say that I'm chayiv, mocheku. Ultimately again, it's mochek. It's mochek, right? Amri pater, ultimately again, the one who says that I'm pater, ultimately again, mekalkelhu. It will say then what? It's considered to be a destructive act. Destructive. The act of writing red on top of black ultimately is considered to be black. Rashi says, mekalkelhu, so let's say, so fundamental machlokes. We'll say, so three cases. Case number one, I write black letters on top of red letters. Everyone agrees I'm chayiv twice. Once for erasing, once for writing. Case number two, I write black on top of black, red on top of red, pater. Case number three, I write red on top of black, that's a machlokes. One opinion says, that's mochek, right? You're erasing the bottom black letters. Second opinion says, no, that's not erasing, that's called mekalkel. That's called the destructive act. A destructive act, ultimately, again, because you are erasing the superior letters. We'll say, I'll just say something interesting. If you just think about this from a beautiful like Musar Haskell life lesson level. So I will say, remember, the colors are very symbolic as well, right? What does red represent? Red almost always represents sin. Right? In you chataechem kashani kashala gabinu. Right? Red always, right? The zehuras, right? The string that they would hang up by the Beis Hamikdash, also on Yom Kippur, right? By the Sir La'azaza would be red. So I say red always represents sin. So see, if you look at these three cases, almost like on a tshuva level, what's case number one? Case number one is writing black letters on top of red letters, which represents a person who has committed an aveira. Right? I have red in my life. I have red marks in my life. So I say, now the shaila is, right, isn't the thing that we struggle with all the time. I've made some dramatic life mistakes. Can I ever rebound from that? Do I really ever have the ability to turn it around? So I'll say, what's the halacha? If you write black on top of red, so I'll say, what's the halacha? So Hilchos Shabbos halacha is yichayiv twice, for mechika and for ksiva. What does that tell you if you write black on top of red? What does that tell you? It works. You could create new ksiva. So I'll say at the end of the day, no matter how red the marks may be, no matter how dramatic the life mistakes may be, tshuva works for everything. You could turn everything around in life. Now I'll say, what's case number three? But what if it's the reverse? What if I started out with good black, right? I started out with mitzvahs, and then I go ahead and make some dramatic mistakes. Now there's red writing over my black letters of beautiful spiritual accomplishment. So I'm saying, don't we often struggle with the question of the following? I've done great things in my past, and now I make some terrible mistakes. Do the mistakes of the present obliterate the good of the past? And I will say, what do you see from the Gemara? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's a machlokes here. But I will say, but we actually paskin, the Rambam paskins, that sikra al gabe dio is pater. That if you put red letters on top of your black letters, you're pater. See, I will say, the good that we do in life is locked in. The good that we do in life ultimately is ours, no matter how badly we subsequently mess up. So if you have dio, even if there's subsequent sikra, right, there's subsequent red ink over it, at the end of the day, your dio, your black letters, your units of spiritual accomplishment are yours and always yours. So I say 2 dramatic life lessons. You could put black ink on top of your red letters. No matter how badly you mess up, you could always do tshuva. But halacha l'maisa, red letters never obliterate the bad ink. No matter how much I do mess up in life, it doesn't take away the good that I've done. Let's go back there. Says, now back to Gittin. Watch this. Boy minei, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Did I skip? No, good. Boy minei, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. We'll say an interesting case. Eidim shen yodim lachtom. We'll say, listen to this case. What happens if witnesses don't know how to sign? They don't know how to sign the names. So what's halacha? The yachtemu ksav elyon. Well, so listen to this. Yachtemu. So listen to this interesting shaila, right? So this is all a setup. I'll say the beauty of Gemara, by the way, is that it conditions us in like sequential thinking. So often when we go ahead and we're presented like with a life issue that we have to come up with an answer on, we often like jump to the answer. Sometimes the way to go ahead and address life's quandaries is sequential thinking. So we'll say, what did we just establish in the previous section? What did we establish? That what's the status of black writing on top of red writing? What's the status of it? I'll give you a hint. We did it 30 seconds ago. Right? It works. Right? It works. In other words, it works. In other words, leaving aside liability. What's the takeaway message? When you write in black ink over red ink, what matters? The black ink. Right? The red ink, so we'll say, now watch this. Let's go back to Gittin. I have a get. I need someone to sign the get. I have witnesses, but they don't know how to sign their names. I have a great idea. What's the great idea? Just write their names in red ink and just have them trace over it in black ink. And halacha l'maisa, what should that accomplish? Is what we just learned. Essentially, again, we'll just look at the black ink, and the red ink will become inconsequential. So the Gemara says, so ksav elyon ksav, ksav. So do we say that the upper signatures in black ink, that's going to be the real writing, and the lower stuff is really inconsequential? Ksav. I will say maybe not. Maybe by signing on a shtar, that halacha is different, and the upper signatures will not be consequential. Amar le'eno ksav. He said halacha l'maisa doesn't work. The upper signatures of the black ink does not obliterate the bottom red ink, and it's as if they did not sign. Amar le, but he said, V'halo, le'maratana rabbeinu, ksav elyon, ksav le'inyan Shabbos. But I will say, Rabbi Shmuel says, Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rabbi Yochanan, you just taught us by Hilchos Shabbos that if you write black ink on top of red ink, then what? You're chayiv twice. Once for mochek, once for kosev. Which that upper black writing over red ink is superior. Amrlei, this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. V'chi mipnei she'anu medamin na'aseh ma'isa. Ultimately, again, just because, so I'll say literally translated means just because we're comparing things. Ultimately, again, should we actually act on it? So what Rabbi Yochanan was saying was like this. It's actually quite interesting. The Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting when he said before that if you write on Shabbos black ink on top of red ink, that you're going to be chayiv twice, he didn't mean it in explicit liability. So Rabbi Yochanan was kind of positing. He was floating an idea that I think you should be chayiv twice. But he wasn't ruling definitively, to the point that Rabbi Yochanan said, if this were to happen in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, I would not tell a person to bring a carbon for this. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, so Rabbi Yochanan says, I was kind of espousing an idea, right? I was working through a svara. But just because I was working through a svara, nasa maisa, would we actually act on it? Rashi says, lahakel, afilu le'in Shabbos in ba maisa le'adinu b'zman shvis v'midash kayim, lo hayisi somich al dvarai, so we'll say this is fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan says like this: if this happened during times of the Beis Hamikdash, I would not tell a person to bring a carbon based on this svara. It's a svara. It's a logic, but the logic doesn't necessarily. Rabbi Yochanan said, this is fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan was like this: I was advancing a svara, a logic, but I'm not necessarily saying that my logic holds water halacha lemaisa. So, for example, on Shabbos, Rabbi Yochanan says like this: if someone were to actually write 2 black letters on top of 2 red letters, and the Beis Hamikdash was standing, and he said to me, should I bring a carbon? I would say no. I think you're liable, but I would not tell you to bring a carbon. So, if I will say based on this, in the get case, Rabbi Yochanan would not be comfortable suggesting write red letters and have the Eidim trace over it, and you're good to go. Interesting. I'll say, by the way, this is one of the things that sometimes you see this, like, in learning, sometimes you have concepts that are espoused as a proper theoretical construct, but they're not necessarily made to make their way into the world of halacha l'maisa. Again, sometimes we're very concrete thinkers. Mutter, asar, kasher, does it work? It doesn't work. This is part of the beauty of the world of learning, is that you delve into ideas, you develop constructs. The constructs work and are solid in an intellectual fashion, don't necessarily translate into halacha l'maisa. So this is a perfect example. What Rabbi Yochanan was saying is, I'm espousing an intellectual, a theoretical construct, but I don't know if I would apply to halacha l'maisa. Fine, itmar. So I'll say, now watch this. Now we've gotten into this topic, which is quite interesting. Eidim shen yodim lachtom. So I will say, what do you do if you have witnesses who don't know how to sign? I will say, you're thinking to yourself, witnesses who don't know how to sign, why would you ever use witnesses like this? So I will say, what we're going to see is like this. In general, that is correct. In general, we don't want to use witnesses who don't know how to sign. What we're going to see is the one exception to this rule is Gittin. Now, let's say if there's one theme that we've seen over the course of Gittin, it's what? Mishum iguna hikilu barabanan. Now, let's say, what's our greatest fear by Gittin? What's our greatest fear? Greatest fear? Husband is going to change his mind. That's our greatest fear. And therefore, again, when you have a husband who's willing to give a get, we go, right? We do. And that's why we're going to see, I will say, is even in the type of Eidim we use, we are willing to relax the standards in order to allow a get to get done. So we'll say, now watch this. Again, we'll see this come out in just a little bit. Itmar, what happens if you have witnesses who don't know how to sign a get? Rav Amar, Mekarin laheniyar, chalak, umimalin es akraim dio. So we'll say, this is very interesting. So Rav says, what do you do? You go ahead and I will say, Mekarin laheniyar, which literally sounds like you tear a piece of blank paper and you fill in the openings with ink. And I will say, what does this sound like? A stencil. See, here's what's fascinating about this. If you look at Rashi says Mekarin is Misartin. Rashi gives a different interpretation of this, although Rabbeinu Hananel disputes it, and we're going to see Ahmed Beis clarifies this. Rashi seems to see the cases like this, that what you do is you essentially etch the signatures into the parchment, and you have the witnesses just essentially trace over the etching. Now, the truth is, it's a problematic interpretation because etching, we're going to see, is writing. But right now, that's how Rashi is translating it. Everyone else understands it exactly as it sounds like, which is a stencil. You cut out their names on a piece of paper, put the piece of paper over the get, and just simply let them trace their signatures. Okay, just be aware of the machlokas. In any event, the Shmuel says, Be'ever. Write out their names in lead and let them chase over the lead. You says, Be'ever, sagalait, the lead? Kasu be'ever, b'shachar b'shicha kasher. We learned that lead Lead is a bona fide type of ink that ultimately creates halachically sound writing. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, Lo kasha ha ba'avra ha b'maya da'avra. So we'll say one is talking about lead itself, one is talking about water mixed with lead. So apparently, water mixed with lead ultimately creates enduring writing, but ultimately, again, lead itself does not. Okay, Rabbi Avo says ultimately again, go ahead and use water in which gall nuts were soaked. Not to be confused with me'afatzim with gall nut juice. Okay, so Rabbi Hanina said elsewhere that ultimately meitaria and afatza ultimately is good. It creates bona fide ink. Lokasha hadafitz hadalo afitz. Ultimately, we'll say it all depends on whether or not the parchment was treated with gall juice or not. Fine. Because fruit juice, right? Fruit juice can't go ahead, or ultimately gall nut juice cannot appear on gall nut juice. Fine. Rapapa says baroque. We'll say, what do you outline it with them? Saliva, right? Make an outline with saliva of their signatures, and ultimately, again, let them trace over that. So we'll say, so what's the common denominator over here? So we'll say, once again, these are all examples, but what's the idea? You could trace their signatures, not trace. You could write out their signatures essentially in what? In a way that is not permanent, that is not going to endure. Therefore, again, essentially we'll say, what am I trying to accomplish over here? I have witnesses who don't know how to sign. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to go ahead and create something that they could just simply write over or trace. The challenge is, I can't do it in a way which represents bona fide writing. Otherwise, what am I doing? I'm signing their names for them, which obviously will not work. So the way it has to work is, whatever I'm going to create that they could trace over has to, by definition, be impermanent. So these are all examples. You could use saliva, you could use this, you could use that, as long as it's impermanent. We'll say, but here's the qualification. We'll say all of this is begin, right? All of it ultimately, again, all of this ability to go ahead and create something for the witnesses to trace over is only by Gittin. Rashi says, Mishum iguna kidlakaman, tolo mashkachinan sahadi biki, ubisoch kach yifrash zeliyam o yamos zakil yavam. Shabbos say, all of this is only by Gittin, because by Gittin you could run into a concern where, let's say you're looking for witnesses, and for the only people you have around, the people who can't write their names. And we're afraid if we delay to look for proper witnesses, the husband's gonna leave, or he's gonna die. Now, we'll say, if you say, so what if he dies? Who cares? Let him die. We'll say, what's the problem then? What's the problem? Yibum, potential Yibum situation. So we have a vested interest in just getting this done. Aval b'shtaras, low. But I will say, ultimately, again, but by regular shtaras, we don't allow this. Now, I will say, halacha l'maisa, by regular shtaras, you need to find what? You need to find witnesses who know how to sign their names. So I will say, listen to this. Dahu da'avid of the b'shar shtaras, because there was a guy who tried this. So there was a guy who was writing a shtar, whatever kind of shtar it was, a loan document, a sale document, and what happens? He wanted to try this shtick with going ahead and creating a traceable signature for an ignorant witness. This is what happens. We'll say, Nagdi Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana was menagi the kishkas out of this guy, right? So again, he gave him lashes, right? He gave him lashes. So I will say, that, can you imagine if we still had that today, right? You went to Kiddush Club, I see me after davening, right? I was like, right? Imagine. I was like, in all seriousness, you should just know, like, how different society looked when there was an enforcement arm from Beis Din, right? Again, it's a different. But anyway, but we're not going to have Kana. So we'll say good. Tanya, we'll say I'm a Beis. Tanya Kava. I just heard that gasp. I heard that. Oh, right, yeah, it's a long daf. We'll be all right. We'll be okay. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kava say, the Rav, so we'll say there is a brisa that supports Rav. Eidim shein yodim lachtom. So we'll say if Eidim don't know. So let's remember again. Just want to point out. Good. Let's see. So Eidim shein yodim lachtom. So if you have witnesses, we'll say don't know how to sign their names. So what's the halacha? Mekarin lahen niyar chalak u'memalin esakroim dio. We go ahead and we'll say stencil. We go ahead and we create for them a stencil, and we let them go ahead and trace their names. When is this so? Begite noshim. I will say this is a special dispensation for Gittin. Once again, we'll say logically, do we want witnesses who don't know how to sign their names? Do we want those kind of witnesses? Of course not. Of course not, I will say. But Lemaisa, again, when it comes to Gittin, we have a vested interest in getting it done. And therefore, again, we'll use whoever we have at our disposal. Obviously, I will say, I do want to point out, there are criteria for the witnesses for Gittin as well. Don't think there's no criteria. There are criteria. But Lemaisa, we relax the criteria a lot. And I was going to say, if you can't sign your name, that's a pretty good indication of a heightened level of ignorance. So, Lemaisa, now again, person has to have das, person has to have an understanding of what's going on, person has to be able to has intellectual capacity. They're lacking this basic skill. Okay. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel says, this ability to use Eidim who can't sign their name is only a din by Gittin. But by other shtaras, if the witnesses do not know how to read and how to sign, they cannot be witnesses. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, Kriya mandikar shmei. Let's say, who's talking about reading? Where did that come up? We've been speaking about knowing how to sign your name. I will say, by the way, you could have someone who knows how to sign their name, but does not know how to read, right? I will say, again, somebody just knows how to give their signature, right? But Lamaisa, they don't know how to read. So where did reading come into all of this? To which the Gemara says, you're right. We'll say, no, the best word is, what's it saying? Chisur mechsura is like so exciting, like you just found treasure, right? We lost something, we found something, here it is. Here it is. Eidim shein yodim likros. I will say, listen to this. Witnesses who don't know how to read, what do? Koran lifneihem, we read the document to them, the chosmin, and they sign. V'she'ein yodim lachtom. Now we'll say, that's case number one. So case number one is witnesses who know how to sign but don't know how to read. What do we do for them? We go ahead and we read the shtar to them and then they sign. Next case, she'ein yodim lachtom. Witnesses who know how to read but don't know how to sign, or don't know how to read or sign. Ultimately, again, that's where we create the stencil. When is this so? I will say, when is this so that halacha l'maisa? Right, the halacha l'maisa. I will say, we can read the shtar to them, make a stencil for them. This is Gittin Oshim. We'll say, this is only by divorce documents. Aval shichruri avodim ushar kol ashtar. So we'll say, but by every other type of shtar, im yodin likros v'lachtom chosmin. In order to sign on a shtar, we'll say, what do you need to have? By all of the shtaros, reading and writing. Reading and writing. You have to know how to read, you have to know how to write. V'imlav ein chosmin. But if not, ultimately, again, you cannot sign. I will say, I just want to point out something very interesting. So let's finish. I'm Rabbi Lazar. My time I'll both say, so why do we relax the standards of Eidos so dramatic? But do you know what this means? That for a get Isha, you could use an aid who does not know how to read or write. I will say, that's dramatic. Remember again, we'll say, what do Eidim do? What's the role of Eidim? What is the role of Eidim? We'll say, a written document that does not have Eidos on it is worthless. You can blow your nose in it. It's worthless. It's worthless. You can't do anything with it. We'll say, what vests a document ultimately, again, with halachic strength and validity? Witnesses. It's Eidim. It's Eidim. Eidim make it. Eidim make everything. So now what she's telling me is, Gittin, which is one of the most significant areas for halacha. Let's remember again, the stakes are so high for an invalid get, right? What happens if a woman is given an invalid get? What happens? Let's say she remarries, those kids are mamzerim. Right? She has inadvertently committed adultery. So let's say, yet we are willing to use Eidim who cannot read or write. What's the svara? My time Rabbi Shmuel Shlo yeh benos Yisrael agunos. Let's say it's very simple. It's very simple. Rabbi Shmuel understood because sometimes at the end of the day, in order to get the get done, you have to be able to utilize who you have in front of you. And you can imagine a scenario where, let's say you're doing this get somewhere and you have a very unlearned population. So you have to use the people you're with. Use the people you're with in order to be able to get the job done. I will say, I just want to mention, a lot of times, so the halachos of Gittin are portrayed as misogynistic, uncaring. The man has all of the control, the woman doesn't, the rabbis don't care. So I was saying, why are Kadosh Baruch Hu created the halachos of Gittin in a way that vest the husband with an incredible amount of power, right, and the woman with much less. I don't know. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's halacha. I don't know why he decided to do that. But I will say, but you do see from the Gemara how there absolutely is a strong push on the part of Chazal to make sure that a woman does not get trapped in this process. Again, can you go ahead and prevent a crazy husband from doing crazy things? I will say, in general, legal systems never could help with crazy. Nothing helps with crazy. That's why it's called crazy, right? I will say crazy. In other words, this is true in any legal system. Legal systems operate so assuming that people are somewhat normal. The moment that someone chooses to be a nut and go crazy, there's no legal system that has the ability to address craziness because it's an outlier. Legal systems always work with the norm. I will say, but it's just important to understand that Chazal understood the real danger that a woman was in with these types of situations. And I will say there are contemporarily there are mechanisms that help to alleviate craziness. So the halachic prenup, we're going to want to talk about this. There are CS halachic prenup, and there are other forms of halachic prenuptial agreements that try their best to prevent an aguna situation. I will say, but even with the best halachic prenup, can you prevent crazy? There's no, I will say, if there was a mechanism to prevent crazy, I would buy that up, right? I have so many people I'd love to give that to. Right? Say, like, if there was a pill, maybe there is a pill, like, right? I'll say, I just want to point out, right? I just want to point out, like, you can't, people who have lost it and want to make the life of someone else miserable by exploiting a particular system, there is no mechanism to prevent that. And I will say, again, the fact that we don't have organized communities with organized batei din, a lot of the strong arming, which we'll talk about, that could have been done in the past, cannot be done now. Again, there are other forms of community, but again, I just want to point out, just know that even if we don't have a good solution to many of the problems, don't think for a moment that the sensitivity is not there. The sensitivity, and you see over here, Rabbi Shmuel Silber is saying, I'm willing to dispense with all of the halachos concerning normal eidos. Because I don't like this. You need a guy who reads and writes. He'll say, right? Can you imagine? It's a get. Guy rolls in from the street. What's your name? Reuven Ben Yaakov. Can you write that? No. Right? Can we help you write it? Okay. Right? In other words, this is the guy. He's not getting the bracha under the chuppah, right? You're not giving this guy the keyboard. But for Gittin, we're willing to go and have him, right? Because he wanted to get a divorce. It's incredible. Some of those Rav says, Halach Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Rav says, Halach Rabbi Shmuel Silber, saying that we could even use Eidim who don't know how to read and write for Gittin. Rav Gamda Mishri Rava Amar Ein Halacha. Rav Gamda said the name of Rava. The halacha does not follow Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi said, "Who does halacha follow?" Ve'elakiman kirabanon follows Rabbanon. V'ha'ahu da'avad uvda b'shar shtaras v'nagdi Rav Kana. But 1 second, there was this guy. So I'll say, there was this guy. The Rabbanon seemed to say that halacha l'maisa, you could use Eidim who don't read and write, even for shtaras. But what about the story? What about, so we're just on the end of Amud Aleph, about the guy who did this? He used illiterate Eidim, and Rav Kahana flogged him. Targama Akriya. That was talking about the ability to read. So I will say, so bottom line, by the way, you should know, we'll see in the Rambam, but we do pass like Rav Shimon Gamliel, that Allah say, even if Eidim cannot read or write, we can use them for Eidos on a get. We'll read to them the get, and ultimately, again, we will create a stencil for them to be able to sign their names. That's how motivated we are to execute this get as quickly as possible. Sorry, the Gemara goes weiter. So Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara tells a story. Rabbi Yehuda mitzvah, so Rabbi Yehuda had very poor eyesight, and he strained himself to read the get, or to read a document, and then he signed. I'll say, if you take a look, right, says Rashi, it's the first short line, Rabbi Yehuda, Zakin Haya, the ain of chaos. He was very old. His eyesight was poor. And I will say, when he had to go ahead and when he had to sign on something, he would strain himself to read it. I will say, Lav dafka get, any shtar. So the Gemara says, Amrle Ula said to him, Lo tzrichas, you don't have to do this. Daha Rabbi Lazar Mara de Eretz Yisrael. Let's listen to this. Because after Rabbi Lazar, the Maradash of Eretz Yisrael, can you imagine getting that title? Right, Rabbi Lazar, the Rav of Eretz Yisrael. Now, by the way, why was Rabbi Lazar called the Rav of Eretz Yisrael? Rashi says, "O Yemar de Eretz Yisrael, Baki mikol chaveirav u'mesechas nida mefarish amai karle mar de Eretz Yisrael." So we'll say he was the biggest Talmid Chacham. It happens to be able to say that he was called the biggest Talmid Chacham because he was the most proficient, actually, in the halachos of nida, and that's why he was called the Mar de Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so Rabbi Lazar, the Mar de Eretz Yisrael. Karu Kameh, we'll say they used to read documents before him, the chasim, and ultimately he would sign. So we'll say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? You don't have to read the document yourself before you go ahead and you sign it. Rather, what can you have? You can have someone else read it on your, right, read it to you, and then you sign it. Similarly, Rav Nachman, Karu Kameh Safri Daini V'chasam. Rav Nachman also would have the scribes, right? The scribes for the judges read it before him, and then he would go ahead and sign it. So we'll say, what do you see from here? What do you see from here? That Allah Kalamaisa, you don't have to read the document yourself before you go ahead and you sign it. You could even have it read to you. So once again, Ula Saint Rabbi Yehuda Rebbe, you don't have to strain your eyes to read the document. Someone could read it to you, and ultimately, again, that's going to be enough. But Dafka Rav Nachman, B'Safri Didaini, the Islu Imsa. Now I will say there's a catch. What's the catch? So I will say, what's the concern when you're ultimately, again, having someone else read it to you? What's the concern? That they're not going to read what's actually written. Maybe they have a vested interest in like reading you something a little bit different, and now you're going to sign on it. I will say, in general, the great danger of assigning things to someone else instead of doing it yourself is that perhaps it's not going to get done in the way that you wanted it to get done. So specifically over here, the great concern, now here it's even more, because here the concern is, well, maybe the person is going to read you something different, right? You're relying on their reading, and now you're going to sign on it, and you've signed on something that you did not realize you signed on. So therefore the Gemara says, V'dafka Rav Nachman b'safri didaini dislu imsa. I will say it's dafka a case of like Rav Nachman and the scribes who wrote for the judges. Why? Because they had a fear and a respect of Rav Nachman. In other words, I will say the only way this works is if the person reading it to you has what? Has an awe and a fear of the person they are reading to. This way, they will not what? They will not corrupt the document. And the Gemara says, Aval, Rav Nachman Safri Achrini, Rav Nachman even and other scribes, or Safri Didani V'inish Achrini, or even scribal, judicial scribes, and other people, low. So I will say, so again, the only ability to rely on someone else reading it to you is only when the reader has a fear of the listener. And therefore, again, we are confident that the reader is not going to corrupt that which is written inside of the document. Incredible. Rav Papa, so this is a great case. Rav Papa, ki avi asila kameshtara parsa, da'avid ba'arko shal kusim. So listen to this. Sometimes a document would come before Rav Papa. And what kind of document was it? It was a document that was written in the Persian courts. Right? A document written in Persian, done by the Kusi or the Persian courts. So we'll say, so what happened? So now, what would our Papa do? So we'll say, Papa couldn't understand the shtar, right? Because it was written in a foreign language. So what would he do? Take a look at, right. So by the way, Rashi points out over here, we'll say, listen to this. So this is a document written in a Persian court, written in Persian, signed by non-Jewish signatories. So now what would happen? So Makri Lushnei Kusim Zebefnel Shobefnezeh. He would go over to two Kusim. Right? Now, say in this context, Lav Dafka, that Kusim means Kusim. That's why it's changed in Agos Siyum to read Goyim. So he would go over to two Persians, two non-Jews, right? And he would ask them to read the document. I will say, not together. He would go to Persian A, right? And then what happened? And then Persian B, not in proximity to each other. And I will say, he would not indicate to them what he needed from them. In other words, I will say, Masiach Lefi Tumo means there are two ways you could get information from someone. Either they offer it of their own volition, or you solicit that information, but you don't indicate why you're soliciting that information, or a direct solicitation, right? I need to know this because A. See, he would go over to two Persians, right? Individually, not within the presence of each other, and ask them just to translate the document without telling them why he needed the document. And I will say ultimately again, and after they translated it, and he understood it, and ultimately and ultimately again he would allow the holder of this document to collect from encumbered property based on this document. So I will say it's actually a pretty powerful Gemara, because what you see over here, Rav Papa would essentially allow one Jew to collect from the encumbered property of another Jew with a document executed in a Gentile court. Now I will say, when this could work, how it could work, again, is a bit more of an involved conversation. I will say, what's the point? What's the takeaway for us? The takeaway for us is Rav Papa is going ahead and basing his enforcement of a document based on someone else reading and translating the document for him. So you see, once again, it's this same idea. And I will say, the chiddush over here is the guy, the Gentile who is interpreting the document may not have a fear of Rav Papa, but ultimately, again, it's what's called masiach lefi tumo. There's no reason for him to lie. So the Gemara goes back to Amar Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Huna bar Nosson, Haki Amar Ameimar. This is what Ameimar said. Hai shtar parsa. Listen to this. This Persian shtar, the Chasimi ala Sadi Yisrael, that Jews signed on it, Magbil Bey Mishibadi. Ultimately, I will say, so again, here's the case. Ruvain produces a shtar that he's owed $10,000 from Shimon. And I will say the shtar is written in Persian, was done in a Persian court, has Jewish signatures on it. Ultimately, again, the Jew, Ruvain, the creditor, could collect even from Shimon's encumbered property. Really? V'ha lo yadi lemikre. But one second, no one knows what it means. B'diyadi, where the Beis Din knows, Beis Din understands it. I v'ha b'inin k'sav she'en yachal is daif. But I will say, in general, when we do documents in Beis Din, like we said before, we treat the documents in a way, right, that they can't be forged or tampered with. But this document doesn't have it. V'laga b'dat pizza. No. The case over here is where they treated the document from the Persian court with walnut juice. So therefore, again, it's tamper-free. V'ha b'inin tzarach lachsar min yana shel shtar b'shit achrona. So I will say we're going to see one of the interesting halachos that we have in shtaros is every shtar at the end of the shtar has to have a one-line summary at the end of the shtar. So, and this doesn't have it. Veleka b'nte mahadar. None of this document had it. So the Gemara says, okay, so let me get this straight. So I will say, so I don't understand. So essentially, you're talking about a shtar written in Persian, but it satisfies all of the criteria ultimately of a regular shtar executed by a Beis Din. So what are you coming to teach me? Coming to teach you that documents can be written in any language. We learned that. Tanina, get shekasful ivris, the Eidav Yavanis, if you have a get written in Hebrew, but the witness is signed in Greek, or Yavanis, or the get is written in Greek, the Eidav Ivris, and the witness is signed in Hebrew, kasher. It's kasher. So what do you see from here? A document can be written in any language. So what's the chiddush? If it was just from this Havamina, I would have said Hani Mili Begin. I would say maybe once again, that is only a leniency when it comes to Gittin, to get Isha, that you could write it in any language. Aval shtar shtaraslo, but maybe other shtaras ultimately again cannot be written in any language. Kamash Molan, they can. Incredible. So I will say, so again, bottom line, just so we're keeping our train of thought over here, we're beginning to see some interesting kulas that come about when it comes to Gittin. Number one, you could use witnesses who can't read and write, as long as you read it to them, and then ultimately teach them how to sign their names. Number two, in general, it appears that even if you can't read a document, you could have a document read to you, right? And you could sign based on that, as long as what? The person performing the reading is a trusted source. That's the chap. The person has to be a trusted source. Next. We have another 2 minutes. We'll stop after this. So let's listen to this. So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel, listen to this. Nasan la niyar chalak. Well, so let's say the husband gives his wife a blank piece of paper. Va'amar la hareze giteich. He says, this is your get. That's interesting. They'll say, not a blank check, right? That's done at the beginning of marriage, right? So they'll say, so this ultimately, again, so this is a blank piece of paper. This is a blank piece of paper. So they'll say, so nasan la niyar chalak, va'amar la hareze giteich. And he says, so this is your get. So migareshas. She says, wow. She's migareshas. What happened over here? We're concerned about saying maybe what happened. Maybe he went ahead and he wrote the get with walnut juice. Now, I was saying now, and what? Now, I was saying, and maybe the walnut juice became absorbed into the parchment. In other words, there was a get written on here, but Allah Kalamaisa, the writing of the get became absorbed. So, 1 second. Meisvei, raise the catch. You're about to say, okay, Meisvei, how raise the gidei v'rat loss of zakar saliyam, O la'ar, o l'chol davar ha'avid, v'chazer v'amar shtar pasim shtar amana. So we'll say. So now listen to this case. What happens if a husband goes ahead and gives his wife harei zegiteich, right? V'nat laso, she took it, right? Harei zegiteich. Ultimately, again, and then we'll say what happens. Obviously, he gives it to her. He gives it to her. Then he takes it back and he throws it into the sea or into the fire. Or in other words, the document is lost. So we'll say, so now what happened over here? Husband said, this is your get, gives it to her, takes it back. No one has had a chance to see this, right? And then he throws it into the fire. Throws it into the fire. So we'll say, what's talacha? Then he says, v'chazer v'amar. Now let's make it more complicated. Why not? Right? Let's make it more complicated. V'chazer v'amar, shtar pasim, shtar amana. We'll say, then he says, by the way, it wasn't a get. It wasn't a get. It actually was a different kind of document. I will say, shtar amana and shtar pasim are often documents that are written to make people look wealthier than they are. In other words, we'll say, watch this. I go over to my friend Ruven. I say, Ruven, listen, I'm in the middle of a big business deal. Here's what I need. I need you to write a document that says I owe you $1 million. We both know I don't owe you $1 million. But it's helpful with the bank, right, for me to show that people owe me money. Some people call it fraud, right? But I'll say, again, we call it friendship. We call it friendship. No, so again, of course, it is fraudulent. It is fraudulent. I want to be clear. You can't do it. But there's such a concept. In other words, both parties understand. Right? Ruben doesn't owe me money, but it's a shtar amana. It's a shtar money. It'll help my credit. So I'll say. So now, again, husband essentially is claiming afterwards that which I gave you ultimately again is not even a get. So I'll say, what's talacha? We'll say no to go. We're going to stop here for today. So I'll say, so again, we're going to pick up tomorrow, Miras Hashem, with the blank document get. We'll begin this case. So we'll say and see how in the world could it be that a husband gives a wife a blank piece of paper and suddenly it says harei zegiteich, and suddenly somehow it works. And Miras Hashem, we continue to all say, what a start to the week. What a start to the week. Shkoyach. All right, Chavra, have a great, great day. It's wonderful talking to all of you.